In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes. The order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
Stigmata Studios presents The Scorpion Strikes. In this comic book, a terrorist called the Scorpion is transported to a secret CIA prison. He quickly turns the tables on the guards and administrators and releases the prisoners. A well-armed anarchist called Constituent Zero assembles a team and fights to take the prison back. This story is a dark political action thriller. The Scorpion's actions set the stage perfectly for the Jin Jihad. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com. Stigmata Studios presents The Test of the Scorpion. In this comic book, while the Jin Jihad is raging on one side of the city, the terrorist called the Scorpion sets a secondary attack in motion as he obtains a small tactical nuclear bomb. A mysterious, ever-living warrior called Cyrus the Dead Guy steps forward to test the faith of the Scorpion and his lunatic followers. This is an action-adventure story. It's a bit of swashbuckler that wraps up the Jihad stories. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, The Test of the Scorpion, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
In the year 1090, there was founded in Persia the religious and military order of the Assassins, whose history was one of cruelty, barbarity, and murder. And for good reason. The members were confirmed users of hashish, or marijuana, and it is from the Arabs Hashashin that we have the English word assassin. Harry J. Anslinger. Boom!
The Abercast. Occult. History.
Jesus.
Conspiracy. Violence.
Everybody, welcome to Abercast. I'm John Towers, the head creative, the head mother effer in charge of Stigmata Studios. So, got a couple things to talk about up front. Fiends of the Flesh is out. I have a story, the Communion of Svaryar Gajello is on there. There's a link in the show notes. You could just go to my Amazon page. I'm represented there. Or you can go, well, no, it's not on Stigmata Studios. Should I put it on there? I don't know. Go to Amazon, search David J. Fairhead presents Fiends of the Flesh. It's got a fetching cover, if I do say so myself, because I made the cover myself. I'm typesetting 2 new books. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you what the name of the first one's gonna be. I decided on the actual title today. For the next 4 of my projects that are coming out is based on, well, not based on, but kind of each pays a homage to like 60s and 70s cinema. One of them being a spaghetti western, and that's the first one that's coming out, and it's called Vengeance in a Saloon Called Hell. I think that's what it's gonna be called. Vengeance in a Saloon isn't enough, but Vengeance in a Saloon Called Hell might be a little too much. Vengeance in a Hell Saloon. I don't know. If you guys have any opinions on that, let me know. The second one I'm thinking is going to be called Programmed for Justice. And this is the 70s kind of vigilante book, or maybe Programmed for Death. I don't know. It's about a serial killer who goes through like an MK Ultra thing, and he comes out the other side, and the government kind of steers him to do some dirty work for them that they didn't want to get into. It has to do with, it has to do with kids. I'll just leave it at that. All right, if you guys want to help me with that at all, you know where to reach me. If not, I'll just go to stigmatastudios.com. You can find all of my links to all of my social medias there. Or you can wait till the end of the show and I list them all off. Vengeance in a Saloon Called Hell. Vengeance in a Bar Called Hell. Vengeance in a Tavern Called Hell. Ooh. Programmed for Justice, Programmed for Death. Maybe it could be like one long title, Programmed for Justice / Programmed for Death. Okay, so I'm still working on it. The newsletter finally went out. Finally, I'll put a link to the newsletter in there, so if you don't want to sign up for whatever reason, you don't want to give me your email address, you can still have access to it. A day late and a dollar short. But I got a lot of fun stuff in there, and you can see Burn Watch 2017. I'm all pretty much healed now. It's a little discolored, but you can't fuck with the bacon grease, son. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I told you I had a lot of stuff up front here that we got to talk about. You can support the show in many ways. You can rate and review it on iTunes. They say that helps. I don't have any rates or reviews just yet, so come on, help Abercast out. You can share it with your friends. If you like the weird shit we talk about on this podcast, then you probably know other weird fuckers that would like this topics too. So there are monthly costs accrued with this kind of stuff. The network, Society 13, picks most of it up for me. But I do got to pay for time. I do this show. Usually I do this show on Fridays when I put my pens and inks down. And they're like the tips are smoking from all the fucking work I'm doing off of them. And then I go ahead and I plug this microphone in and I talk to you guys for like an hour or so about some fucking subject matter. So, you know, time is money too. People tell you that shit all the time. So if you'd like to support the show, for some reason you don't want to rate or review it, or some reason you don't have any friends, or you're afraid to admit that you listen to the show, you don't want to share with anybody, you can always buy a book or two, and that helps the studio in general and all of its many endeavors. So there's that. So we're going to talk about it. It's complicated. We're going to talk about today. Okay, so in my comic book universe, I have a fictional radical Islamic terror group, and it goes back, to like ancient times or whatever. And it's just a way for me to talk about terrorism without having to say it's like Al-Qaeda or ISIS nowadays, And in my stories, I started it, back in the Crusades. It's actually based on Al-Qaeda, and it's some of the newer stories that it takes place in. They're doing a lot of like ISIS kind of stuff. But it actually started as like, what if Al-Qaeda was founded back in Crusader days, and there actually was a group of radical Islamists called the Hashashins. So that's who we're going to talk about today, because I felt like talking about my group called the Dar el Harb, which is a total bastardization of Dar Harb, which is Arabic for the House of War. But I wanted 3 syllables, so I added an owl in there. Because that's what, I mean, everything starts with like an owl or has an owl in it, so Dar el Harb in my comics. So it's a tribe or organization of initiated agents and warriors silently moving through civilization, hanging in the background until it was time to strike. It's also a frontline terror troop, elite shock troopers, a band of radicalized warlords. And their base currently in the books I'm working on now is in the Brass City, which those of you who know 1001 Arabian Nights surely knows the story of the Brass City. But this is a way for me to include them in a lot of my period stories. They could be in the Barbary Wars. They could be like, radical agents of the Ottoman Empire in the Barbary War and World War One, or they could be like, initiated shock troops in World War II. A lot of people don't know that the Mufti of Iran, actually, there were panzer divisions manned by Iranians. So there's a lot of it. Also, it's a way for me to embed them in the Vienna 1683 book. So it's just a way for me to talk about like all because the Ottoman Empire, these Turks and stuff, they're almost as bad as they're kind of worser than Germans, because they're on the wrong side of history since like ancient days. And we can argue all day about the Crusades and whatnot, but we can cut that out and talk about that. Like, they're on the wrong side in World War One. They were on the wrong side in World War Two, and the Germans aren't flying planes in our buildings anymore. So it's just a way for me to talk about the radical Islamist sort of problem with just fictionizing it a little bit. It's kind of like the way that if I was going to do a story about like crazy Christians, I would invent a church like the Westboro Baptist Church. Like, I would invent people like that and kind of make fun of them or use their traits as villainous comic book traits instead of, labeling all of Christianity with it. You see what I'm saying? So I feel like I'm belaboring this point. I feel like I'm belaboring it a little bit. I've got to try to get through this. There's an awful lot of shit being said about these assassins or Hashashins these days, because there's a video game. Apparently, if you just kind of Google search this topic, the Hashashins or the assassins, like, you'll find these dopey guys with like Wolverine claws or something and like hoods over there. Like, how do these guys see anything? They got hoods over their faces. They run around, and like Magneto was in a movie about them. And I'm like, that guy's not Persian. I don't know. Do they get upset about whitewashing that? Anyhow, in this game, they cast the Templars as the bad guys, I guess. I just learned this today just by working on the show. So if any of you guys are fans of that show, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about the traditional version of this story, not so much the video game version of this story. Oh, hold on. It's almost time. I got to shave pretty soon. All right. And besides that, there's also a lot of apologists out there glorifying these guys. But I'm going to try to break it down. So what I want you to do is I want you to mix up a gin jihad, test it for poison. Tonight we're going to talk about the Hashashins or the Assassins. Right after this. All right, so Hey guys, I'm sorry about turning this whole thing into like a PR pitch for this villain organization in my comic books. I didn't mean to do it like that, but I was just gonna do an episode on ISIS, because it was like a lot of times for these history episodes, I just look at what's happening next week, and I relate it to like something about history that I like know something about. So it's like I think it's like. Sometime next week is like the anniversary of ISIS taking, I think, like Ramadi or Fallujah back or something after we abandoned it, and so I was getting ready. I was amping up. I was loading up to do an ISIS episode. Like, where'd they come from, anyways? But I felt in order to keep it straight, not just so much for you guys, but for me, for like what the show's supposed to do. I felt like I had to kind of start at the beginning. Like I mentioned before, like I think a lot of what we do good, what I do good with the way that I structure these episodes is I add context that's you don't maybe not get other places. So I felt like we had to start kind of at the beginning, how I started getting into this topic. And if you just look through my shows, you could tell like this Ottoman Empire, this Barbary Wars, and this kind of stuff. I identify these guys as villainous a lot. And this is kind of where, when I started doing my research, this is kind of where I started. So that's kind of why I'm dragging us back here, and kind of why I had to do all of this explanation about the Dar el-Harb and this fictional terrorist organization in a lot of my books and stuff. So I'm not going to bring them up again, and you could just kind of forgive me. I'm sorry for it, but I just had to put that part in context, because we're about to get actually more in context. We're about to get more in historical context. I can't believe that there's anyone out there that doesn't know this by now, especially any Americans. But in order to provide context for this, I need to make sure that you all know the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims. So let's get into this then, into one of my favorite topics, the religion of peace, the Islamic faith. So there are two basic denominators of Islam. There's the Sunni, which is 85% of the Islamic world. Basically, Muhammad did not leave a secure line of succession set up. So these guys, they elect their own religious / political leaders. Shia, here's where it gets dicey. Shia is 14% of the Islamic world, and it believes that the line of succession was passed on basically in Muhammad's family tree. After Muhammad died, leadership then fell to his cousin and son-in-law, Ali bin Abi Tayyib. Ali ibn Abi Tayyib. So this dude married his cousin, who he was 25 when they got married, and she was 9. 9 years old. Getting back on track, Shia is made up of a bunch of smaller sects, its largest being the Twelvers. The Twelvers, and these guys believe that the 12th Imam, who disappeared back in 874 when he was 5 years old, will return. He'll crawl back out of some well in Iran somewhere, and it'll start the end of the world. So that's the largest. This guy's waiting for this kid to crawl out of a well to start the end of the world. Back on track. Another one of these groups, another one of these Shia sects is this is going to trip me up, is the Ismailists. These guys were radical Muslims of their day. But late in the 11th century, the most radical of the radicals splintered off and made the Nizari Ismailists. It sounds different in my head. It's like Israeli Ismailis. And it was a splinter of a splinter of a splinter of the Islamic faith. It was the most radical of the radicals, and who would soon become known as the Hashashins, or all right. So why do these guys do that were so crazy? Why are they called Hashashins anyways? What does Hashashins have to do with assassins? Stick with me all. We are all going to sort all this out right now. The Nizari Ismailis were led by Rashad ad-Din Sinan, who is also called the Old Man of the Mountain. I brought him up on an episode. I can't remember what we were talking about. But the story that I told on the other podcast is actually in these show notes too. So we're gonna retread a little something. But I got like more details and stuff in here. His biggest enemy at the time was Sultan Saladin, who was a Sunni of Kurdish descent. He was the first Sultan of Egypt and Syria. He was a bad dude. He was the leader of the military campaign against the Crusades. This dude is such a big deal that he has an animated TV series about him right now. He was the dude. He was in that. He was like the hero of that apologetic shit sandwich Kingdom of Heaven by Ridley Scott. The one with that had Legolas and Qui-Gon Jinn in it. He was like the guy. You know, he was like the noble, tribesman or whatever that like let everybody live at the end. This is Saladin. So they take this guy pretty seriously. I mean, he's got his own cartoon and everything. So the Sunnis don't like the Shia and so on and so forth. And it's true that these Muslims, like the Muslims that are running around in Syria killing other Muslims, it's because they don't believe in Muslimism like the ISIS believes in Muslimism. So this is like exactly like that. It reminds me of that. I can't remember what fucking neo-punk band did it. It's a Fat Joe. Who is that? No Effects. Like, I'm more punk rock than you. They did a song. I think it's them. I think it's No Effects. I'm more punk rock than you. That's what these guys are. They're like, I'm more Muslim than you. No, I'm more Muslim than you. They're going to argue about it and cut each other's fucking heads off. So, Sinan, the Old Man of the Mountain, trained some of his Fedayeen. And this was like they were like the lowest rung of his rankings, but they were disposable. They had a lot of training. You could see they got a logistical problem in this organization because they spent a lot of time training these guys, and then they sent them on these suicide missions. The best of these cave-dwelling savages. By the way, this is where Frank Herbert got the name of Paul Muad'Dib's personal guard. The Foytik is these guys, the Fedayeen. I gotta get back on track. They train these dudes to beat Saladin's bodyguards and assassinate the Sultan. These guys just use daggers and shit against dudes wielding like these scimitars. They're like, you just approach, keep your head down, keep your dagger hidden. Like, that doesn't look conspicuous to the Sultan's bodyguards. You got to come up with some new shit, son. Because the Sultan's bodyguards were too strong. But apparently the episode left an impression on Saladin because he started wearing body armor all the time after this attempt on his life. So the Old Man in the Mountain sent spies and sleeper agents into Saladin's military camps as soldiers and merchants. They lived inside of these camps, seemingly assimilating into the army and the supply train. This actually reminds me of the 9/11 guys. They were living here, they were training here, but everywhere they looked are people that they wanted to fucking incinerate and chop the heads off of. There's also another little thing with these guys. We'll get to them later, if I remember. If I remember, we'll talk about this later. the other connection with the 9/11 guys. When the old man of the mountain himself, or he sent someone, depends on what source material you're reading or watching or looking into. He sneaks into the camp in the middle of the night, and he pins a note inside Saladin's tent with an assassin dagger. And the note was like, "Yo, you are offering us death and shit. And that is like the shit we like and stuff. So like, bring it on. Signed, the old man of the mountain." See, radical Islam even back then was a death cult. Anyhow, this really riled up Saladin, who called for negotiations with the Nizari Ismailisms. Ismailis. I just don't have the tongue for these words. In time, Sinan, the old man of the mountain, sent an emissary to Saladin with very important instructions. The emissary shows up and insists that he and the Sultan speak alone. They go away, and the emissary, Sultan, and 2 bodyguards. The emissary's like, "Yo, Sultan, why do you refuse to talk to me alone, dog?" And Sultan says, "These 2 men are like sons to me." And the emissary says, "Fine then, check this out. Yo, use bodyguards. Would you like to kill this Sultan if I told you to?" And both of the bodyguards indicated that they would kill the Sultan if the emissary said. This is the shit. When he sent these guys in, these guys worked their way up through the ranks, these sleeper cells and stuff. They worked their way up. They seemingly assimilate into the society or the civilization or the culture they're in. And they start taking, ranks, leadership positions, whatever. Like this guy, these 2 dudes were in the king's bodyguard, son. And for the whole time, they just worked for this old man of the mountain. So what was the next step of their plan? Like, how would the 3 deep cover spies fight their way out of the camp? How would they explain the Sultan's dead body? They were ready to die. They didn't kill the Sultan, and some peace was made, but the Sultan was amazed that these men would die to kill him. Sure death, possibly torture. So, how do you train a man not to fear death, but to run to it? So the question was, how to train men into welcoming, nay, to run towards death, not to fear it. It's easy, son. Drugs and boobs. Drugs and boobs. So an initiate to the Hashashins would be rendered unconscious, drugged, and when they awoke, they were to be in some version of heaven. They would be in a garden, a lovely garden. Mrs. Brown, you have a lovely garden. They would be given mind-altering drugs, feast, booze, and women. Only to be drugged again and taken back to their regular cave or whatever with their favorite goat. And then the old man, of the mountain would tell them that they were in heaven just then, and they can only get back there when they died. Whenever doing whatever he said, or for Allah, or jihads, or whatever. This provided strong motivation for some guys. These guys, look at the time they were in. They were being invaded by the Christians. Their other Muslims didn't really like them so much. They weren't allowed to talk to the other guys, because they thought that a dead kid was going to crawl out of a well. They lived in a desert. They're going to wind up, marrying someone that they're related to anyways and raise 20 screaming inbred kids all trying to eat your favorite goat. Give me the fast death and booze and boobs any day of the week, son. thinking that only the old man of the mountain could return them to the state of grace and booty, they would do anything he said, especially if it could lead to their death. So what I wanted to say before about the 9/11 guys is, I know this is not the same thing. It's not even the same league. It's not the same sport. It's not even the same fucking country. But the day before these guys went and did their mission on the airplanes, they went to a strip club. I just imagine these guys just doing that. Like, they're drinking, they're having a good time, they're at a strip club just looking at the boobs, and they're like, man, you know, as soon as I crash these fucking airplanes into these goddamned Americans, this is the way eternity's gonna be, bro. That is strong motivation, man. That is fucking, strong motivation. I mean, I guess it depends on what strip club you're in. You know, if you're talking about the Deja Vu in Tacoma, Washington, that's strong motivation. If you're talking about Bugsy's in Elyria, Ohio, you know, you might have a problem, son. So there's this one story that demonstrates the willingness of these guys to die. One story, the old man of the mountain was talking to Count Henry of Champagne, or Count Henry of Champagne, who was returning from Armenia. The Count was boasting that he had a powerful army and that any moment he could defeat the Hashashins. He had 10 men to every one Hashashin. The old man of the mountain disagreed, and he said his army was more powerful despite the numbers. And to prove his command, to prove this, he commanded one of his guys to jump off the top of the castle. And the guy did it. And the Count was super impressed, and he was like, yo, I recognize that these Hashashins had a stronger army than I did. Now, what's funny is, was the guy already at the top of the castle? And he was like, hey, you up there, jump. Or was the guy next to him and he was like, yo, run up to the top of this fucking castle and jump off it right now? In which case the guy would have to run, hustle, up all the steps and shit, over the moat, through the drawbridge, up the secret passageway, carrying torches so he could see his way through the passages and stuff to get to the top and jump off. It would take like an hour for him to get to the top. So I wish this legend was a little bit more fleshed out. So there is some debate. A lot of people are saying that the origin of this hashish story is bunk. It's all due to like misinterpretation, and like they're not doing hash, and that's wrong. It's actually a term for something else or whatever. But remember, I'm skeptical about all this stuff because, like I said, there's an awful lot of apologists and shit out there trying to make these guys into like heroes and things to be looked up to. Not that just smoking a little bit of hash is something bad. There's also these guys that think that these guys are like, they're called Hashashins because they were like high all the time, sword fighting and killing and daggering. And that's not true at all. It's all has to do with this initiation ceremony. Anybody that's telling you, oh, they were just high all the time, run around. First of all, you're not high all the time doing Muslim stuff, because like these guys, they live by like, you have to pray at certain times. You have to be faced a different way. I've smoked hash, son. You don't want to do any of that. You're like, I don't care what way's east or west or whatever, and I forgot my rug at home, and I would rather just sit here and eat some Doritos. That is the shit. Like, super Muslims, these radical motherfuckers, they don't care about all that. Well, no, they do care about all that. So they wouldn't take like the stuff that just blurs you out and makes you want to eat Funyuns on a fucking shitty couch and play video games. Like, that's not the shit. So we have actually something from the writings of Marco Polo, the old man of the mountain, who would drug his young followers with hashish and lead them to paradise, and then claim that only he had the means to allow for their return. Perceiving that the old man of the mountain was either a prophet or a magician, his disciples, believing that only he could return them to paradise, would fully commit to his cause and willing to carry out his every request. Marco Polo. It was really difficult for me not to go Marco Polo. All right, so eventually these assassins got wiped out by the Mongol Empire. In one of the pre-invasions, an order was handed to a Mongol commander. I wrote this down because I just wanted to try to pronounce his name for you guys. Kitbukwa. The Mongolian commander, Kitbukwa, to assault these assassin fortresses in 1253. So they started assaulting these things in 1253. And finally, in 1275, the final Hashashins were crushed and their power was lost forever. However, of course, some of them survived because they were all hiding in deep cover anyways. So it was easy for them to hide in plain sight. And the Quran gives them this thing called taqiya. Taqiya. My European tongue, dude, I just can't get it around some of this shit, man. So I'm sorry. There's 2 Q's in this. Taqiya. Taqiya is called dissimulation. And it means where you are, the Allah or Muhammad gives you the ability to lie about your faith if it'll save your life. So they're like, yo, are you one of those assassins? And the guy's like, no, but it's kind of like a way to have his fingers crossed. And he's just like, no, bro, no, I'm one of you guys. So there is a lot of that, and they can get away with it. But eventually they disappeared from the face of the earth. Or have they? Maybe they lurk in darkness, just waiting for some obscure holy man to emerge from the desert and to sing a song, a secret song. I wrote that. That's not half bad. There's this cool part in that Test of the Scorpion where the some of the Dawah al-Harb guys, soldiers or whatever, are saying, like, Cyrus shows up and they're like, Allah created the ever-living warrior to test the faith of the Dawah al-Harb. Oh my god, it's so good. Dudes, so good. So, eventually, over the course of 300 years, these guys wound up assassinating 2 caliphs, many viziers, sultans, and crusader leaders. So, I mean, you can take it for what that says. I imagine it's hard to get the 2 caliphs. I mean, they had a couple problems getting to the sultan. Eventually, they got to sit down with them. So, I want to say happy birthday to the Abercast. Thank you guys for finding the show. I would appreciate it if you left a rate and review on iTunes for us. It will just help get some light on the show. I have this number in my head, and if I don't hit this many downloads every day, I fucking take it personal. So I'm like, please, bros, help me out. Share the show with your friends. Throw it up on your social media. Find me and talk to me. I want to know who you guys are who's listening to the show. I would love to find out what you like about it, what you don't like about it, what irritates you. Do you like the long shows? Do you like the short shows? Not that I've had a short show in so long. I'm cranking out these hour plus shows. Yeah, I'm anxious to ask these questions. So somebody, please, fucking talk to me. But really, rate and review the show, share the show. You could find links to all of the books except for the one I'm promoting right now on stigmatastudios.com. David J. Fairhead Presents Fiends of the Flesh can be found. If you just Google search my name on, or if you just Amazon search me, I have a page with a lot of my stuff on there. That prose work, The Communion of Scarviar Jello, is in this Fiends of the Flesh book. Plus, I did the cover, so it's pretty cool. The cover is really cool. Even I have to admit it. Like I said, stigmatastudios.com. You can find all the books there, information, yada yada. Let's see.
Stigmata Studios presents The Jinn Jihad. The Jinn Jihad kicks your face with myths, mysteries, epic battles, suicide bombers, quirky characters, and divine power armor. In this epic graphic novel, the warrior archangels descend on a city in chaos. It's all-out war. The non-standard assembly battles an ancient terrorist organization and their ultimate weapon, a corrupted, magically enhanced, unstoppable monster, the Jinn. This graphic novel is a wild ride. It's one part distant Arab myth, one part Old Testament angelic vengeance, and one part unique heroic tough guys. Available on Amazon. Get more info on the Jinn Jihad and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
And like I said, please, if you're still sticking with me, if you're still fucking listening to this, you please go and rate and review the show on iTunes. It's my anniversary show, fool. Come on, help me out. Thank you in advance, by the way. Thank you. Good night, Cleveland.